Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm so excited for the virtual launch of our 2024-2025 season, and we get to enjoy this day, this event with Ben Berman Ghan, who is here to talk about the years, sorry, I don't know how many times I started like that. The years shall run like rabbits. But before we get started, I am going to share an acknowledgement of land. Kaylee and this acknowledged is Toronto, which is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. It is the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wyandot, and the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and the Mississaugas of the Credit. As settlers and newcomers, we acknowledge and accept our responsibility to care for the land and its resources, while also recognizing the continued displacement and colonization of First Nations peoples across Turtle Island. We are grateful to work in the community on their territory. Just for today, I want to further recognize our responsibility as treaty people, not just for today. I'm including this in the acknowledgement for today. In future, Kaylee's going to paste it into the chat. We further recognize our responsibility as treaty people to meaningfully engage in the continuous process of truth and reconciliation. As such, we urge you to learn more about the land at nativeland.ca and to read the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in particular, the 94 calls to action. We commend the Canada Council for the Arts' initial response to call number 82 and urge them to further increase their funding. We also ask anyone joining us today to support the work of Indigenous writers by purchasing their books and asking your local library to expand their catalogs to include a wider range of books by Indigenous artists. Ben Berman Ghan, thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry, is it Ghan or Ghan?
Thank you so much for having me.
Is your last name Ghan or Ghan? Sorry, I meant
It's
to ask.
Gan, but I kind of gave up
Yeah,
this summer and people just say what they want.
yeah. No, I figured it was Ghan, but every time I've thought it in my head, I've thought Ghan, and I was like, oh, no, I gotta remember to say it properly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it, and I so appreciate this book. I can't wait to talk about it. Before we talk about your book, I'm wondering if you would like to recommend a favorite book right now.
I'm going to shout out, I'm just right at the end of John Elizabeth Stinzey's Bad Houses, which came out maybe two-ish weeks ago. They're also the author of My Volcano, there's actually a blurb from them on the back cover of my novel. It's a really great, strange collection of fiction that really sort of taps into their last work as well. It describes it on the back as trans Alice Munro mixed with a bubblier Franz Kafka, and I can see the bubblier Franz Kafka. Yeah, I kind of get it was a lot of fun. It was a delight to read. It was really fun to come back to an author that I feel like I know their work. So I would pick this up now from Arsenal Pulp Press.
Nice. And Kaylee will share a link in the chat for anyone who's interested in learning more. I am so excited to hear you read. I never know what section an author is going to choose to read from, so I'm on tenterhooks waiting to hear you. But before I do that, can I share your biography with everybody?
Sure.
Good. Ben Berman Ghan is a PhD student in English and creative writing at the University of Calgary. His debut collection of fiction, What We See in the Smoke, was published by Crow's Nest Books in May 2019. His novella, Visitation Seeds, was published by 845 Press in December 2020. And his novel, The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits, was published with Buckrider Books, an imprint of Wolsak and Wynn, in May 2024. He is the editor of the essay collection Bruce Meyer, Essays on His Works, which will be published March 2025 with Guernica Editions. And his second collection of fiction, The Library Cosmic, is forthcoming with Buckrider Books in 2026. Ben's writing has appeared in Clarkesworld Magazine, Strange Horizons, The Blasted Tree Publishing Company, Pinhole Poetry, The Thames Review, Paminar Press, and others. He has served as an editor for Wrong Publishing, Terse Journal, The White Wall Review, and others. Ben, thank you again.
Thank you. I've finally started cutting at that bio by saying and others, but I know it's still too long, but that's just life.
No, it's great. I don't know how you could cut it. It's got a little bit of everything that you've done. It's fantastic.
I'm gonna read. Well, first I kind of like to read. I've noticed this summer I made sort of a habit of simply reading whichever section my wife just finished reading. And I think they just finished chapter 6 of the like final printed version. So I'm just gonna read from that. And I'm just gonna start. I don't like giving preambles. The Quiet City. Hello. I know you're scared. It's okay. I know. I know. All of this is frightening. Everything must feel so new. Having a body that's not a body. Trust me, it's something you could get used to if you have the time. I'm Sam. You don't remember if you have a name. A lot of details have been lost. All I have are memories and recordings to piece together the story of you, but they're unreliable and faded. Memories as insubstantial and as hard to reach as you are these days. What were you made for? I don't know. I was watching Daisy when everything happened. I didn't notice any of you until after. Now, Daisy is so much harder to see as she fades into the architecture that deviates from my understanding. But you're easy now. You're hard to look away from. I like the way you glow. I like the images you are. Let's start with the flash of light and then the nothing and then the soft rebirth of you, followed by the death of everything I love. For 5 years, the earth was a world of fire, and the sky was the home of the whale, my whale, from which, from the ground, must have looked so monstrous. From the fire of Earth, ships were launched, each containing two horribly machined bodies, a pilot and a gunner, one fused to navigation, the other fused to violence. They were corpses that still believed themselves to be people, determined to kill what they couldn't understand, but we did very little to reassure them. For when we tried to greet them, all they could see were angels pouring from the mouth of an invader. It was a fight that they wanted, but we were winning, of course. 1 billion years stood between the whale and its aggressors. I thought they'd simply tire themselves out in bloody tantrums, but they didn't. In space, the whale roared, and one ship streaked across the blackness of its massive eye. The ship released its payload, not a gun or a missile, but a man. For only a moment, a human pilot drifted in the black, and we thought nothing at all. But his body had been engineered and reorganized and remade, and as he died, he revealed himself a bomb, 1 million atomic blasts in the heart of our beautiful creature. The whale touched Earth in so much devastation. Its impact was death, and the radiation that flowed from its body was death, and you don't remember dying. You couldn't remember the bodied life you were sure must have come before the death in which you found yourself. You retain only the shape of the explosion, which tore open buildings to bleed like wounds on the ground that signaled the apocalypse. And the end of the whale was the end of the world. And then, after the end, was you, drifting in the wreckage of the mossy silence of the quiet city that Toronto had become. Weeds grew up through the cracks in the sidewalks, dandelions peppered all the places the ash couldn't reach, and the surviving creatures of the city began to warp and change. Then, from that change, came others like you. We're going to the water, they said. In the descending fog, they looked like moonlight. We can be safe there. He watched them go, carried on the air. Safe. We're ghosts, weren't they? What do ghosts need safe harbor from? You found your answer when you looked up. You found us. You found creatures that had made new homes for themselves in the black skies of the city. You found the many passengers of the whale. They frightened you. the pooling ovals of their eyes set in mouthless faces, long and slender human frames of wet and perfect porcelain that split along the waist into many gleaming spider legs that danced them forwards on the air, like jellyfish through pools, their wings protruding, grotesquely rigid and glimmering, framing them but never moving, as if they were not part of the bodies from which they sprouted. You'd learn later that ghosts like to call them watchers, but they don't know why. I like that, though. It's a good name for us. I found it curiously sweet watching your journey down to the waterfront. You were so shy, doing your best not to be seen even by the others. Fear is an impulse of the body. So why did they frighten you? Fear of pain or of hurt, but these are learned things, and you have chosen to hold on to them. Even fear of death, I think. Maybe ghosts keep that too. The Toronto Islands appeared as you fell into the shadow of the ever-abandoned malting silos at the foot of Bathurst Street. You looked across the water and saw trees, runways, and long decommissioned airplanes. In your head, that place was still called Billy Bishop. It was a place where the image you called your body, might feed off of the surviving lights. For you, it was a place to escape empty corpse streets with whose aliens swimming along the tops of the remaining financial district towers. I feel like I haven't spoken much about you. I've been too focused on me, on the grief I have. Sorry, I'll try a little harder. As you walked, bright and insubstantial, across the shallow waters between the city and the gates of arrival, you found a shape just like your own. How did you know he was different from the other ghosts? Was it because he didn't have a voice in the network through which the ghosts communicated? Was it when his fingers signed to you, giving you that small delight of remembrance that through ASL you might not be as quiet as you believed? Perhaps it was his fingers signing, "It's all right, you can walk," despite your silent protest that it was too deep, that the bay would follow you. But his fingers reassured it can't ever take you. That reminder that your reality would allow you to walk on the surface of gentle waves, leaving no ripples at all. You were the two stragglers bringing up the rear of an exodus. He was your first and last companion. I'm going to skip a little bit because there's something I'd like to get to, but I will say those two ghosts, for some reason, are shut out of the islands and not allowed in. Far from the north of the island. Ah. My name is Paul, he told you, fingers spelling the letters. What's your name? I don't know, you said. He shifted next to you. He gathered you close, letting his soft glow, the light you had been feeding him, smother over yours. He became a soft container to keep you together. You looked like a little lightning storm, contained on the ground underneath those leering statues and the memory of baseball songs. The two of you would stay that way a long time. It would be as close to an embrace as you could ever get. Far north of the islands, along the outskirts of the city, far from where the watchers circled, you began to learn the ways in which the world was changing, for the whale had poisoned it, and from the radiation of its corpse came change that had to be seen to be understood. At the edge of a creek in the moonlight, you reached in your hands, dipped them into cool water, imagining what it would feel like. When you looked up, Paul was craning his neck at the trees. He pointed a shimmering finger, and you found it, the first creature of this new world. You gazed towards birdsong. See? Like a bird, but unlike a bird, like the shape of a chickadee or a finch or a sparrow, nothing like those things. Blue feathers coated the whole of its short form, forming little shades in the slope of its wings and cresting forwards to its beak, blue, beautiful, unbroken, even where there should have been eyes, nothing but soft, bristling blue. See? See? It tilted towards you, and in the light of your bodies, its talons could be seen protruding beneath the blue, not talons, worms, tubular, glowing, gentle white against the vine and moss of the treetops, spooling downwards to allow the strange bird its perch, but then coiling upwards again, and at the end of those worms, not claws, but eyes, little eyes peeping from every toe, 6 bright blue and starkly human. See you, it said. We see you. Paul signed, though you didn't know how it could have understood him. The worms wriggled and brightened. The blue eyes blinked and stretched. You're looking. Its voice was a croak, a subtle modulation like vocals stripped from dozens of throats and entwined within the gullet of a beak. We're looking for answers, you signed to it. Perhaps you should have been afraid, but it was such a delight to be seen. We're looking for help. The blue feathers ruffled, rippled. One by one, they folded outwards, twisting and red blossoming within the blue, ringing and overtaking. When the transition was complete, even the eyes had changed. No gods, only gardens, it said. The red eyes blinked. The wings spread out, and you thought you could see fleshy human fingers folded in them, all clasped together. Follow the river, the unbird said. Do not touch the water again. Sunrise peeled across the sky as you entered the city once more, and the whale looked for a moment like it was bleeding again, the way it had fallen from the sky. With high, mournful howls, glimmering porcelain rabbits peeled away from crystalline trees where you stood. You had mistaken them for thick white roots, but now you could see their difference from the bark and crystal, see the liquid ceramic quality of their skin, so they might have been carved artistic renderings saved for the fluidity of movement. Two rabbits scampered in a circle, looking at you with stony eyes. "Merp?" they asked, and from their hide cracked open massive, brightly colored peacock wings, and their tails split to reveal the long green feathers of birds. They did not fly, but sprinted with heads pointed low and long ears flat, wings and tails a sharp contrast to their white shells, guiding them forwards. You watched them race away from you, zigzagging along the high grass. What are they? You asked. They're like us, he said. They're new. I think I'll stop. Was that about 10 minutes? I think I'll,
Yeah, you can
oh,
continue reading if you got to the
oh shoot, I closed the, yeah, I can keep going. I just wanted to,
if you got to the I want you to get to the part that you wanted to get to.
I simply wanted to include a weird animal, and
Okay.
I got two of them. I'm happy to throw in another if you like, but I can stop there if that was about how long I was supposed to read for. I should
That's
start.
great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a bunch of questions for you. It was difficult, as I said to you before, everyone joined us, it was difficult to narrow them down. So I tried to pick kind of the bigger questions, but now as I'm looking at them, I'm thinking, okay, now are these too big? And Ben Berman Ghan might be expecting me to get him to solve the problems of the universe. So feel free to to answer them
Sure.
in whatever way. So I want to start with Toronto because that is where I am. That this is the place I call my hometown, and Toronto exists in this novel as the sort of earthly center, I guess. And so I want you to talk about that. As you mentioned, Billy Bishop Airport is at times an airport. It's at times a launching place for lunar colonization, an internment prison. And so I just want to talk, I just want you to share your kind of thought process with having Toronto as the
Sure. Well, I guess when I'm talking to students, some people say, "Oh, you should just write where you know. You should just write where you've been," and I don't necessarily think that's true. Um, Otherwise, we'd 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 run out of interesting things pretty quickly. But I did. I grew up in Toronto and I lived there all my life. And I wrote a big chunk of this book around when I was applying and deciding to do a doctorate. And I sort of understood the nature of what I was doing as I was like, okay, maybe not forever, but like I'm gonna leave. I will have to move away. In some sense, like I kind of felt, and it was I finished this book in between the first and second COVID lockdown. So there was also a sense in this book for me of sort of saying goodbye. I'm saying goodbye to like the place I'd lived all my life. Because even
Mhm.
if you move back, it's different now. that's just how things go. So there was sort of that sense of it for me. I also feel like Toronto as a city, at least in Canada, is an interesting place to ground certain kinds of discussions. There is a big immigrant community in
Hmm.
Toronto. There are like definable, like I guess power struggles in the city between different opinions on how things should be and how things
Hmm.
should run and what should be included. And so I sort of poured a lot of it into that. It was also, I felt Toronto likes to change so rapidly and so much, and it likes to knock down so much and build things in its place that it would be in some ways like an ideal place to just completely destroy and
Hmm. Yeah.
completely changed and and weirded and wilded. There's also, I'm gonna see if I can find it. There's actually an art installation that I really connected with a few years ago that was in Toronto, called, oh, I did write it down because I'm writing a paper on it. I'm so smart. Um,
Ooh.
uh, Bibaden, First Light. I can't remember the name of the artist. It was an Indigenous exhibit, a piece of Indigenous art, which was a VR exhibit in Toronto around 2019, where you put it on and it put you in Nathan Phillips Square, and the city had been completely sort of like overgrown and destroyed, and had become this forest again. And it wasn't abandoned. You could see tents and you could see canoes along in rivers that used to be the subway
Hmm.
lines. And it was such a striking sort of like, I guess, transformation of a place that I knew in a way that, from one perspective, you could say, oh, this is horrible. The city's been destroyed. And from another perspective, you could be like, well, people are still existing and animals are still existing. And this doesn't seem like a world where we're, going to hit 50 degrees Celsius every summer by
Yeah.
2045. So there was this sort of like seeking. I was like, in some ways, if I want to destroy the world, if I want that kind of, thank you so much for putting that in the chat.
They are the smartest person on the planet. Just so you know, Kaylee is
Really remarkable. It's a really remarkable piece on it. And I have other influences as well that I'm happy to talk about. But yeah, like I guess as a starting point for Toronto, it seemed to me that if I was going to destroy the world and make it stranger, it should be a world where I can point to the streets, where I can feel that sort of conflict, where I can be like, this is beautiful and this is horrible. My
Mhm.
house is gone. Like that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it feels like both for me at reading it. And again, I don't know if it's because I have a love-hate relationship with Toronto, but it really does feel at times like a love letter to Toronto, but also that, of course, if we're thinking about Canada and in reading a Canadian novel, Toronto is going to be the center of all of this capitalistic chaos that will happen after a an apocalypse.
Yeah, it also, it's a city that I grew up in and that I connect with and care about and miss a lot.
Yeah.
But it also seemed a place where I was like, here are huge like police riots and abuses and horrible violent things. Where now I
Mhm.
was like, well, this feels fairly non-made up. Like
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, you can set this here.
Yeah.
So those things together sort of helped me. Another book that I was thinking about at the time was called, and you know what? Now I'm not going to stress too much because I know you're going to get it. I know you dropped in No Friend But the Mountain. And I'm now blanking on the author's name, so I'll see it in the chat in a minute. But it's a really remarkable book by the author was a refugee trying to get to Australia, and Australia stuck him in an essentially a prison camp, like a prison internment
Mhm.
camp for 10 or 12 years. And the way that he discussed these kinds of systems of like what it means to be accepted into a state and what it means to be a citizen versus an alien, and I was really, it's a beautiful Perez Bucciani, that's his name. I didn't need the chat. So that was also, maybe an unlikely influence considering this is science fiction, but that was also
Mhm.
a touchstone for me when thinking about what I did to certain parts of the city.
Yeah. I was going to talk to you about the love story, but I'm going to jump forward now since you mentioned the idea of uh the internment and displacement because there's a moving scene that I was moved by, Daisy Girl's experience when she is an immigrant coming to Canada, and this feeling of slowly losing the place and the language and everything that defined who she was. And then that contributing to a complete loss of self. And so, if you want to just continue what you were talking about, that idea of losing ourselves when we lose language and when we lose the place
Sure.
that we held.
I thought about reading that bit. Maybe I should have. So I think part for me in this book, when it comes to Daisy, who didn't feature in the section that I read, but is mostly the protagonist, and it's mostly
Mhm,
from her point of view, is just how much and how often she changes, and how much and how often she incorporates new, like bodily modes and new languages throughout the novel. She's a human, she's a cyborg, she's a big tree, she can fly, all of these different sort of forms and bodies that she has, and as well as sort of trying to tie into that sort of sense of, like of what is the makeup of Canada and where do people come from in this
mhm,
country and what does that mean? I also just wanted, for me, I thought it was a complication to her, I guess, story and identity that I really liked. That Daisy spends much of this book as an amnesiac. She doesn't know where she came from or who she was. And then we get this little tidbit around, I think in the following chapter after what I just read, where and even the life that she had forgotten was still an edit, was still imposed onto her.
mhm,
So, we never, like, her birth name is not Daisy, and we never get that. We never get her birth name or where she came from because so many things have been layered on top and pushed
mhm,
on and pressed into her that these things are all a part of her, but not maybe not consciously and certainly not in the body that she has
mhm,
now. And in fact, by the point that I read in the novel where they're just about to meet her again, she's back in Toronto, but it's a body that she built on the moon. It didn't come from Earth. So there's all of these sort of opportunities to complicate what it means to be you
mhm,
and what it means to be yourself. And so that was, I guess, my little gift to her is that there's no start to it. You can't go far enough back to get it all. There's
mhm.
always something else. And she lives for about 1,200 years in this book. So yeah, that's a lot of, I finally counted. I never did that before, but that's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
I counted too. I got 900, but now I'm like, did
There's a
I?
little, it's, there's a 300-year gap in the last chapter that is like hidden because I didn't want it to be. I wanted that just for me
Oh,
of
I
how much
see.
pushes there.
Tricky, tricky, tricky. So it's interesting that despite the fact that the majority, and when I say majority, I'm gonna say like 98% of the characters in this novel are um, entities, black boxes, things, objects. But at the heart of the novel, we have love and death. I want to start with the love story between Daisy, a cyborg, and Morgan, a human. The novel itself explores the potential for love to exist, or for it to be a tether anyway that forever connects us to our humanity, even if that humanity no longer exists. It feels like it will be possible, that love will somehow be possible.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to talk about these connections. There's an incredible scene, a moving, torturous scene between an entity that was created from a toaster oven and another character in the book that when that love is lost is absolutely heartbreaking. So I want to talk to you about how love exists in the book and how you wanted it to be portrayed.
I love how much people mention Made the little robot to me. He keeps coming, when I was writing, he was such a small part, but he keeps coming up. And I'm like, I'm glad
Yes.
the itty bitty robot.
The little toaster oven.
Yeah, yeah. So I think
But there's also like the love story between Nora and Miles and
Mhm.
Percy and Arthur. Like there's some really powerful
Yeah,
love
yeah.
stories.
So even though this book is layered with a lot of, I think, horror and a lot of weird and sort of the, I guess there's some action, but it's mostly people looking scared and lost for a really long time until a tree grows. Um, uh, I did think about this book while I was writing it as a romance first and foremost. It is the one element of the book where no matter what else I was doing, this was a complicated book, and full credit to my editor, Jennifer Hale, who helped me sort of reconstruct it from drafts to make it make any kind of sense. But the thing that was at the core of it for me and that I sort of rooted through it was that this was a really, really long sort of arc between these two women, Daisy and Morgan, and a really long arc between their separation and what it means for them to be reunited again and what they are when they've been reunited again and how they recognize each other after all this time and all these changes. Um, and because of that, because that was the through line for me, and in some ways the idea was we see them in a like grounded in human relationship at the beginning of the book, which is or not beginning of the book actually,
Mhm.
but near the end of the I don't put that in until near the end of the novel, but we see their sort of start, and it's just these two fairly radicalized former like students in Toronto, and they can't sustain the relationship that they have, not because of each other, but because of the sort of the violence and the direction that the world itself is heading. That's the thing that splits them up. It won't let them be both together and hold on to their like morals and their sense of self. So it separates. So they're separated and they're split. And Morgan goes off to space and makes a little robot. Daisy becomes a oh well, like Daisy becomes an asset. Daisy becomes the Terminator, and on all of these changes that they go through, and that did sort of help make spin out all the other little love stories throughout the book. I do
Mhm.
love the relationship between Maid and Morgan in the book as well, which is not like a romantic relationship in the traditional sense. The little robot, little toaster robot, and the woman who made him, it's more symbiotic than that. It's
Mhm.
more they become very literally joined, like to the point where by the end of the novel they speak in we instead of I. They are a single entity. And but not in a like one has taken over the other, but that this is how they've supported each other and recognized each other. And that sort of spun out through the rest of the novel. I sort of felt Percy and Arthur as sort of this kind of, first of all, their names are a King Arthur joke, but I sort of saw them as sort of this tragic, didn't quite get there echo of what
Mhm.
Morgan and Daisy struggle through and finding each other again. Like they are forced to give that up to be what they want the world to be. Um, and then yeah, by the time and then the one relationship in the book, which I have heard people be like, this was a romance, which is Arthur's, and if you haven't read the book, these words don't make any sense, and that's fine. But the relationship between Arthur's parents, Nora and Miles, and I've heard a few people be like, that's a romance, and I'm like, that's actually the one like love in the book where I'm like, this is toxic and abusive.
Yeah.
He puts a bomb in his head. Um,
Well,
but
especially who Nora is, like,
yeah,
talk about definitive
how
catalyst.
Yeah, I'll talk about Nora in a little. She's actually my favorite character, even though she's sort
Mhm.
of a specter hanging over the rest of the book. If I have favorites, but then for Morgan and for Daisy, they're so changed. Like when I set out to write this, I remember really early on thinking I was like, "There's going to be one sex scene at the end of this book, and it's been going to be between like this weird monster and a robot." And like epilogue, and that was the last thing I wrote, was their sort of so by the time that they are reunited in such a way that they can actually see each other and understand each other again, because I
Yeah.
think when they first meet once more, there's a lot of distance and a lot of hesitation. But by the time they're reunited in such a way that they actually see and accept each other, um, Daisy is this mass of wires and plant fiber that sort of cobbles together itself bodies and doesn't really see individuation that way, but she sees her self as this massively distributed consciousness. And Morgan, who is also part of Made, is just this huge data center that's plopped itself down on Mars. And they
Yeah.
both decide and they meet on the moon one more time, which is actually where both of them died. Um, like Morgan dies in orbit on the moon, and Daisy died on the moon, and that's sort of their. I would say for each of them, that's actually their second death. There's
I hope there isn't anybody listening to this and writing any of this down because
That'd
there.
be crazy. Um, yeah, that's actually their second death on the and then that final sort of like recognition on the moon of and they see each other and so it's not a successful it's not a
Mhm.
successful love story as in they're together in the end and it's happily ever after, but they reach a point where they both feel rooted in themselves and happy with who and what they are, and they can
Mhm.
be that for each other as well. And so that was sort of the really long sort of, I guess, like arc of romance in this book.
Yeah. And at the other end of the spectrum, of the human experience, we have death. Um, the novel, I think, asks this question, do we ever really die? Either as individuals or as a species, as a humanity. Big questions again, but again, there's a moving scene where Percy dies, and this happens quite early in the novel. Percy dies and is reborn. And there's a sense that Arthur's grief, arguably one of the most painful experiences of love any human being can have, is necessary. And Percy's rebirth kind of interrupts that essential experience of not just love, but that essential experience of being a human being. And so how does that kind of big question, do we ever really die? Should we
Yeah.
die? Like what does the end mean? How were you thinking about that with the novel?
Yeah, I think for Arthur's grief, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I've actually thought about it like that. For the grief that's in the novel, I think there's something to. I was thinking a lot about, I guess, matter, and I'm trying to think of a way of saying this in a way that makes it works. I think when you look at the arc of the novel and you see Arthur's grief and you reflect on it at the end, very much like Daisy's grief at the end and lots of other the other sort of people we meet along the way, it ends up being more grieving for change than grieving for
Mm.
thing, and that's sort of one of the threads in this book of um, like Arthur who keeps on coming back. He doesn't stay dead. He's blue at one point. That's a because I'm a huge X-Men fan. You need some blue people. Um, but the I guess the thing that he keeps trying to impress is that there is no death, there's no ending. And I am not saying that it's not about there being no ending, but that sort of this recognition that people die all people that the who people are and their identities that dies people die that way all the time in the same way that the whole world ends, but there's still a world. It's just different. Throughout this novel there's two ways of seeing it, for the main character at least. Daisy dies in her mid-20s, and then she's cloned, and then that clone dies, and then something else pretends to be her, and on and on and on. Or this is one continuous person changing and growing and becoming all of these different things over and over again over time. So really, there's really only one death for me, like one actual death, and well, two actual deaths in the novel. One happens pretty early on, and the other is right at the end, and that's more about, again, just one more like change and one more piece of sort of embracing, allowing things to change and allowing things to move, which I think
Mhm.
is different than thinking about dying and ending. Um, and that's, I guess, how I saw that sort of journey. And for Percy and Arthur so early on, Percy is grieving change, but he's also grieving, or he's also fearing newness. Like
Mhm.
I think there's an element of his Percy died, so when he comes back to Arthur that's wrong somehow, that's incorrect, and that's something that he very radically changes his position on. Percy hasn't died. Percy's simply changed, and sort of, I guess, the crumbling of like natural orders and the way that we think life is supposed to go
Mhm.
more the focus than whether or not things can die at all.
Yeah. I felt really like that because Percy came back so quickly. I really felt like personally, just as a reader, that kind of interruption of grief, that feeling of um, not just resistance to the change, but the need for change, like the need for that moment to continue differently, right? Without Percy.
Well, a
But
big
it,
sort of challenge in that section of the novel, at least
Mhm.
I was thinking about it, is that first chunk on the moon, Daisy the cyborg goes up there and
Yeah.
seems like the colony has been infiltrated by moon zombies. And this sinister otherly force that is like corrupting and changing things. And I guess the thing that I tried to think about so much is that turn, which is that there is no sinister or villainous force except the forces that are putting that ideas into the world. The only
Mhm.
real horror is the rejection of these people who have been changed.
Yeah.
Sort of going from, like the idea of someone whose head's exploded into mushrooms and that's obviously horrible and evil to like he's just a little guy. He runs an art
Yeah.
gallery. It's fine. Like let him live. That was sort of a hard, I guess, push to sort of play with in that horror, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I just have a couple more questions there. Again, a couple of big questions. But if anyone has any questions for Ben, please direct them to Kaylee, and they will ask on your behalf. Um, the novel explores the future in which AI in various forms is the predominant species. On page 146, the mother AI asks what its purpose might be. Nora, who is the designer, says, love them, protect them, but the machine hears not them, but it. In it, and this is quoted from the book, in its early design, it could not distinguish between life and artifice, a blissful state of ego where nothing existed but components of a greater whole. I want to talk about that because I think the idea of artificial intelligence is complicated, I think, for a lot of people, especially artists, I think, especially people who are concerned with that sort of creative side of our humanity. And yet it is inevitable, right? The idea that at some point in the future there will be more that is artificial than human creating all of the things that we rely on to live and love and laugh and experience joy.
Um, I don't know if that's true. I think a big thing for me, first of all, I did not foresee Chat GPT or whatever when writing this book, and I
Right.
still, and I still don't care about it. Um, I think a big
Good.
distinction that I would sort of make between what I've written about and what a lot of writers have talked about and what we have is
Yeah.
they're just calling what we've sort of have now. They're calling it AI because that sounds cool. It's not. It's not. You know, Dolly is not alive. It is not conscious. So I guess my distinction there, because I did have someone in the summer be like, "Wow, it's just like that," and I'm like, "No, it's not. There's nothing behind that. It's just
Yeah.
ChatGPT is just a really good predictive text algorithm. It's just an algorithm that's putting the most likely next sounding word into the chat. But I do think the connective tissue is the sort of because throughout the novel, AI isn't necessarily bad. There's the happy little robot. There's all these monsters. There's lots of different modes of being and living that come about. The thing that makes, I guess, the city AI or mother, the thing that makes her, because she does gender herself, the thing that makes her sinister is sort of I think the thing to think about is what do we want AI for? What
Mhm.
jobs do we want it to do? And but also this idea, we have this idea, or a lot of people seem to have this idea that AI will be better than us and will be like this impartial, excellent thing. But it will really just be whatever we put into it. A good example of this is some of the AI that's been put into facial detection and police scanners. I'm misquoting someone now, but I remember seeing a number of years ago this report on how AI was more likely AI racially profiles people because that's the data that police have fed it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like so this idea that AI would be impartial and good, I'm like, well, no, if we build this thing and we're like, okay, good, take care of the world, and then we give it all of this bigotry and all this sets of violence, it won't come to life and do a Skynet. It won't just nuke everyone, but it will just do its best to perpetuate what we've told it to. So the
Right.
AI in this novel was told, it's built and it's told, okay, cool. There are citizens who are legal people in the area that you control, and then there are intruders. There are people on the inside and there are people on the outside. If the people on the inside break any kind of rule, then they're on the outside. And so the AI does its best and it goes from there. So it rigorously classifies what it means to be human and what it means to be agented and what it means to be legal. Um, there I take from an Italian philosopher named Giorgiano Agamben really heavily on his idea of um, or the way that he's not the only philosopher in biopolitics, but on the way that he defines political life from just biological life. Political life
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
life that we've legislated and we've granted rights, and then everything else you can kill it whenever you want. And that's sort of so if we build an AI and we're like, cool, okay, but we build it under these systems, it'll just do what we tell it to. That's sort of, I guess, the. And then as for like AI making art, quite frankly, I think at some point that's gonna just fall apart because I don't think that there will be. I don't think it's interesting, and
Yeah.
the only people who seem to think it's interesting are the people currently going into debt to push this as a like it's just the latest tech bro scam. I don't think truly when we reach a point, I don't think the idea of AI making movies or writing books, the only people who are going to buy that are the people who are like insisting that it's cool because they're the ones making it. I don't. So in
Right.
some ways, like, yes, there will be more artificial, more and more, and this will push, and it makes grading essays a huge bummer. But I don't think that we're at any risk of AI replacing art. I think Guillermo del Toro had a great quote the other day where he was like, "Yeah, it makes a pretty convincing like vista, but it's kind of like it's like the backdrop of your computer. How much money would you pay for a screensaver that nobody made?" And I
Yeah.
do that's sort of going to be the thing that kills it is people want they want to use it because they want to make art for free with no one in the way. But I don't think that they truly understand the people doing this that they want to make art for free, but no one will consider it art worth like people will
Yeah.
want to receive it for free.
Yeah. Well, from your lips to the robot god's ears. Okay, I have one final question. Again, Nora Traveler says the future is always coming, which I was like, yes, the future is always coming. And yet, as a species, we don't listen to the future. We don't listen to the possibility of the future. There is a lot of mythology in the novel with the whales and so much more. I'm not gonna go into that because I feel like as a species we are for whatever reason inclined to still rule our lives and guide ourselves by the mythology of the past rather than creating a mythology out of the future that we know is coming. The ecological destruction that we're participating in and all of the stories like the years shall run like rabbits and almost every speculative fiction novel that considers an apocalyptic future like those will in some ways be the mythologies that we failed to listen to And I want your take on that.
So, there's sort of, I guess, two ways for me to come at it. First being, for us, the future is always coming. I think this morning, even, bit of a bummer. I think it has been officially announced that we are now past the point where we will be able to prevent temperatures rising by, I think, 2.5 to 4.5 degrees Celsius by
Yeah.
2050. That doesn't sound like much, but it does mean millions of people are going to die at some point in my lifetime. That's so that future is coming. We decided not to stop it.
Mhm.
So far anyway. But the other thing to think about in the book, or the other influence that I take, is from a British critic and writer named Mark Fisher, who passed away a number in 2017, who wrote this. I have it somewhere. Where is it? I'll find it. Who wrote this itty bitty tome called Capitalist Realism. Oh, to put that in the chat, have people buy that. And it opens on this argument, or on this, and it's a great book, and it's a great piece of media criticism, and it's a great piece on like it talk on books and film as well as British punk bands. But it opens on the statement: it's easier to imagine the end of the world than imagine the end of capitalism.
Right.
Um, and what he means by that is, Fisher was making the argument that in the systems that we are in, and the sort of what we've set up for ourselves, it is easier to imagine actually blowing up the planet than changing the way that we do things.
Mhm.
And so Nora imagines this, or Nora is given a vision of this horrible future. She's given and a future that doesn't come to pass in the novel. Nora is given a vision basically of what would have happened if she hadn't seen the future. And in attempting to prevent it, she kills everyone on Earth in a way. I don't talk about, it's sort of just hinted at what happens outside of the city, but people aren't chugging along. So
Yeah.
in this, like she can't conceive of a positive change, so she just accelerates this like destruction. And that sort of the those I guess so I guess that idea that the future cannot be stopped and that it's coming in this novel is sort of twofold, and negative and a positive. The future can't be stopped, as in we can't do anything to prevent our own inevitable disaster, and the future can't be stopped, as in maybe we should let go of some of that. Like
Mhm.
we are so obsessed with going backwards and keeping things still and keeping nature pristine and keeping our cultures and our governments exactly the way that they've always been. Maybe it is that these changes are also inevitable.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, if we think about ourselves culturally and humanely, there is most definitely a like fast forward future, right? Because as you say, we've been stagnant for far too long. People have been resisting for far too long these cultural and humane changes, and yet happy to continue to purchase the next great thing off Amazon, and despite the destruction all around us, just keep doing that. Um, thank you so much. I am sorry if anyone has any questions, Kaylee. Um, feel free to, you know,
We
Kevin.
just got one from Kevin.
I like fun things too, I should probably say. I'm a cheerful person mostly. Uh,
Yeah.
So Kevin asks, how early in the process did you settle on the name Daisy? It's just such a perfect name, largely because it's so incongruous for a cyborg warrior.
yeah, there's a couple reasons for the name actually. I'm sort of fortunate. I was even reminded of a few. First of all, the first robot, technically, like the first computer to ever speak, sang a song called Daisy. You
Wow.
heard it if you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. When Hal, is it 9000? When Hal 9000 is dying and he goes, Daisy, Daisy. That's
Daisy.
creepy, but that's also because the first computer to make sound, they made it sing that song. I feel like I'm making you work so. Oh, did you just drop the? I was about to say maybe we should put
That's
that.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing that's a little nod for me. It's sort of the sort of birth of a thing that's not a person or a bird speaking.
Mhm.
Other things, it is one of the several translations of my partner's name, and that made me very happy to put that in. And then on a third layer, she starts as purely mechanical and she ends as mostly floral. So I wanted that sort of, even when Daisy's at her coldest and her most made of metal, there's still a little piece of like of fauna and flora like that's still sort of clinging to her, I guess.
Mhm.
So I was very fortunate in that I thought of a name where it can be a fun little thing that makes me feel oh so smart, a very like a gesture and also something that actually applies to the plot. And
Mhm.
I've never achieved that again. In fact, I might not name. I think I shall simply stop naming characters now. They're all just going to have
Mhm.
titles.
Or the letters and numbers of some of the characters. And also daisy sections. The writerly question I had was daisy sections are written in poetic verse, which I thought was really a, a great choice, a great writerly choice. Ben, thank you so much. We are 3 minutes out from our hour. I so appreciate you sharing your insights about the world, the future, love, death, everything that you consider in this novel. The years shall run like rabbits, which is an Auden quote. There are a lot for anyone who hasn't read it. There are opening quotations in front of every chapter, which I is one of my most favorite things in books. So again, thank you for that. I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kaylee, thank you as always for all of the work. For everyone who's joining us here today, please follow Ben on his social media. It is Inkstained Rec. His website is www.inkstainedrec.com. You can follow us on our socials. The video of this event will be up on YouTube. If you feel like sharing it with friends and family, you can go on there and subscribe to our channel. Our in-person launch takes place on October 6th with Joita Bidlowska, Aaron Brubacher, and Emily A. Whedon. Doors open at 6 and we start at 6:30. And if you're not in Toronto for that event, we will live stream it. And there will be a Zoom link available for that on our Eventbrite page too. I will leave you with the last word, Ben,
Uh, I'll give a quote from a good movie.
as opposed to a bad movie.
Yeah. No, actually, that's too much of a pun. I don't have anything left. I think I'm. Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone hasn't read the book, it's not. I don't think I made it less confusing. So everyone, I hope everyone have a
No,
good.
it's fantastic. Oh, and also I forgot everyone who registered for this event, their name will be included in a raffle at the in-person launch. So you might actually win this book along with the other novels we will be reading or hearing and discussing on October 6th. There's a couple of other book bundles that I will have, and Type will have gifts as well. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for registering. Thank you for sitting here with Ben and I for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.